Hey, what's happening guys? It's the Visuals Peak. Welcome to another episode on the Retro Show. Today I'll be talking about the 12 best fighting game final bosses. Be featuring bosses from Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat and many more. When it isn't about rage quitting against your friend sitting next to you on the sofa or some guy playing against you across the country, fighting games are all about beating the arcade mode. Doing so means defeating the annoying final boss. We fought so many final bosses over the last 20 plus years. Whether the tyrants or bloodthirsty loners out to prove they're the best, there are plenty of cheap ass villains standing in the way of character specific epilogue cutscenes. So I've decided to rank the 12 best final bosses in fighting game history. This ranking includes both default final bosses and special secret bosses, but they have to be the last guy you fight. So that means the likes of Vega, Goro, Antonov, Apocalypse, they won't be mentioned. So without talking any further, let's get straight into it, man. In number 12, we have JINPACHI MISHIMA from Tekken 5. I think this is the moment when Tekken's story started going off the rails. Don't get me wrong, I still love the lore of the series, but after doing a game about HEIHACHI vs Kazuya vs Jin, they decided to go further and bring in HEIHACHI's dad. And he's possessed by a demon because why not, right? The reason he's possessed is because otherwise he's the one member of the bloodline who isn't a jerk. That doesn't make for a good boss design. In Tekken 5, he's taken over the Mishima Zaibatsu and sets up a new King of the Iron Fist tournament, just so somebody strong might be able to kill him before he completely loses control and wipes out all life on the planet. His ending cutscene even has him cry blood over this because he's that hardcore. The tragedy is that in the end, he was killed by his great grandson, Jin. But Jin came out of it learning the wrong lesson. Jin, suffering from his own possession problems, went and took over the Mishima Zaibatsu and started a world war as part of an elaborate plan to commit suicide by putting a giant target on his back. It took 2 more games for him to finally get his head on straight. In 11th place we have Sagat from Street Fighter. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Sagat is not the final boss, it's M. Bison. But real Street Fighter fans will know in the very first Street Fighter, Sagat was the final boss. I know it was a crap game, I know nobody cares about it, but Sagat has to be on this list. It's more of a courtesy. While he is a difficult opponent, Sagat's position as the final boss isn't really that memorable, so I don't blame you guys for not knowing or remembering. If anything, he's defined by his defeat here. It's why he has that cool scar on his chest, why he suddenly has a Dragon Punch kickoff in the sequel, and it's the crux for his redemption story and frenemy relationship with Ryu. Sagat's spot as the original Street Fighter boss actually helps build up M. Bison and Shadaloo in general. He returns in Street Fighter 2 scarred both physically and mentally, while physically stronger and more driven, yet he is still only the second last boss, showing that this time he's outranked by a big-chinned dictator. And in 10th place we have Olga from Tekken 3. Tekken is like WWE, where it's so much better when it isn't focusing on the old man running things and his family. When the bosses aren't part of the Mishima bloodline, they're usually some kind of unearthly being. You have your Egyptian demigod, you have your goth lady wearing sludge overalls, and you have your Aztec god of fighting. Olga is the one Tekken boss who doesn't directly tie into the Mishima family. It's refreshing and makes the whole world feel bigger. He's a completely unrelated force who reveals himself by beating the crap out of different mainstays in between Tekken 2 and 3. It was more impressive early on because Olga got credit for wiping out so much of the early cast, but those guys returned in later games, and it seems Olga only really killed the first king, and maybe Jun, who sucks so good for Olga, outside of non-canon stuff. Oga didn't last long in the Tekken series though, but his death brought forth the rivalry between Heihachi and Jin, springboarding the Mishima War into a new direction. It was also explained that ancient Oga form was defeated by Paul Phoenix, which is sadly one of the last times that character was treated like an actual threat. And in 9th place we have Heihachi Mishima from Tekken. In terms of pure power, Heihachi is one of the weakest boss characters in relation to his series. He's played the final boss a few times in the Tekken series, but these fights are always less about him being the ultimate force of destructive evil and more about his importance to the story with the occasional redeemable moment as a human being. It's also about how he measures up to his son, Kazuya, the would-be protagonist who is ultimately more evil than Heihachi. The first game's plot focuses on Kazuya as a vindictive monster who smiles at his father's assumed murder, and Tekken 4 finally brings the three-way generational conflict between Heihachi, Kazuya and Jin to a head for the first time. Then, in Tekken 7's story mode, Heihachi gets his final battle with Kazuya in a war that's been ravaging the whole world. Despite being hilariously unkillable in the past, Heihachi appears to be dead for real now, and it solidified his true purpose as a final boss, to pass the torch to his son, who is both stronger and straight up worse as a human being. And in 8th place we have RUGAL Bernstein from the King of Fighters series. I really like this guy. He has so much swagger and radiates some sort of coolness, which you can't hate the guy. As with most early villains of fighting games, RUGAL is overshadowed by his replacements. Shang Tsung works for Shao Kahn, Sagat works for M. Bison, Heihachi is the son of JINPACHI, EYEDOL is the rival of Gargos, GEESE is the weaker brother to Krauser. RUGAL got the ball rolling in his own way, as a way to build to the Orochi storyline, which practically defined all the following King of Fighters storylines. Yet, in the end, despite being the first step in the saga and being killed for good during the second entry, RUGAL has solidified himself as the villain of King of Fighters. Dream match games and non-canon adventures tend to just go with RUGAL as the final boss by default, usually with some extra bell and whistle, like from Capcom vs SNK 2, a coked up RUGAL with AKUMA gimmicks is my kind of boss battle. RUGAL is mostly a collection of awesome motifs and special attacks, but I also love that he's just as defined by his number one weakness. Yes, he's good enough to crush a team of 3 like nobody's business, but he has his physical limits. His downfall is that he doesn't see that. He loses because he absorbs and uses too much power for his body to handle. It's nice when a villain is done in by their inability to leave well enough alone. And in 7th place we have Ryo Sakazaki from Fatal Fury Special. Now, again, I know what some of you guys are thinking. He is just a character from Art of Fighting. But no, those who know SNK, those who know King of Fighters, those of you who know Fatal Fury will know he was actually a boss in the Fatal Fury special.
Terry versus Yo.
Sometime after Mortal Kombat gave us Reptile, and mere months before Street Fighter gave us Akuma, Fatal Fury Special introduced a very special hidden boss, Ryo Sakazaki. Yeah, we know King of Fighters 94 would be released within a year, but this was our first time seeing a major SNK fighting game crossover. This was the first time Terry vs Ryo matchup. One of the reasons this debut hit so hard for me is that Ryo and the Art of Fighting crew never seemed to be too prominent in the King of Fighters games. There are two main continuities when it comes to SNK's fighters. King of Fighters puts everything together and says it all coexists in the same era. Meanwhile, Art of Fighting, Fatal Fury, Budokai 1 and Savage Reign are on a staggered timeline. With Art of Fighting taking place in the 70s, it means that Ryo in Fatal Fury games and Budokai 1 is a hardened, middle-aged legend and not just another young upstart like he is in the King of Fighters. In other words, Ryo showing up in Fatal Fury Special isn't just an early crossover, but a passing of the torch. And in the 6th place we have Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat. You know what, guys? When I first saw Goro, this huge claymation beast with 4 arms and a top knot, who will break you in half if you blink, I always thought, damn, what a way to sell a game. But this unstoppable monster was actually second to some guy who floats. I mean, surely that at least had to mean that Shang Tsung was a special kind of threat in his own way, right? And undeniably, he was. A shapeshifter was a fantastic gimmick for a final boss, especially since it jibed with his tendency to eat souls.
Shang Tsung.
Even though he was turning into other playable characters, the insinuation was that you were more or less fighting all the dead warriors from the years that he had absorbed into his being. Then Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa played the hell out of him in the movie and his legendary status was solidified. With lesser on the totem pole in later games, Shang Tsung regaining his youth made for a great trade. It's just too bad that once games were on discs and had loading times, Shang Tsung's tendency to morph mid-match took a powder. As one of the final bosses in Deadly Alliance, it just didn't feel the same. He was just some any guy. And in 5th place we have EYEDOL from Killer Instinct. Now, this guy, he was so hard to beat. I could never beat him on my first go. But the thing with Killer Instinct is that they always valued character designs first and everything after. Ninja, robot, dinosaur, TNA secret agent, boxer, Native American, skeleton, werewolf, ice creature and fire guy. Then came the story. To that effect, EYEDOL, much like Spinal, is a tribute to the stop-motion fantasy movie monsters of the olden days. Specifically, he's a two-headed version of the Cyclops from the 7th Voyage of Sinbad. He made for a memorable final battle, thanks in part to the cheap-ass healing ability that he'd spam while the other fighter recovered in between rounds. EYEDOL was the last classic character released for the Killer Instinct reboot, and they redesigned the hell out of him, I must say. Depicted as a wholly chosen champion, turned demonic and ogre-like due to his own ego. Idol's two-headed Cyclops look was explained as the result of having his head cleaved in half down the middle, then being resurrected. The wound is healed, but not undone, resulting in some gnarly body horror. Much respect to his old ending, which was not only a parody of Blanca's Street Fighter 2 ending, but by having his would-be mother refer to him as Billy. It becomes both a sly reference to Double Dragon, Billy and Jimmy, and musician Billy Idol. You get it? In 4th place we have GEESE from Fatal Fury. As fighting games are assembled pieces, so are their storylines most of the time. Fatal Fury, not so much. Fatal Fury is really the story of Terry Bogard vs GEESE with a bunch of supporting characters, let's be honest. Even Andy Bogard, I mean, he's just as much a reason to be the protagonist as Terry, but he's relegated to being the guy who is reluctant to sleep with his hot girlfriend. I mean, Fatal Fury is really about Terry and GEESE, and everyone else is at best an extension of the two of them. GEESE is everything you ever want in a final boss, unless you're looking for a giant shooting lasers out his eyes. He's slick as oil and tougher than brick, with a moveset that's based around throwing you like a ragdoll or blasting you into the stratosphere. He's the right balance of difficult enough to make you curse, but not cheap enough to make you throw the controller through your screen. Not only is he unique in battle, but he just has so much personality. His cockiness is on another level. His every gesture makes him look like he knows he's superior to everyone else in every way. But kicking their ass is a better use of his time than whatever else he has planned. Even his counter moves like predictable make him seem untouchable. His cannon death scene in the Fatal Fury games is also second to none. Hanging off a tower rooftop, he sees Terry reach his hand out rather than being saved and maybe even forgiven by Terry. GEESE chooses to smack it away, let go, and fall to his death while looking up at the winner and laughing at him. What a boss way to go. And in 3rd place we have AKUMA from Street Fighter. It's crazy to think how Electronic Gaming Monthly did an April Fool's joke about there being an enhanced version of Ryu as a secret final boss in Street Fighter 2, and Capcom decided, yes, that will do. That's how one of the most iconic fighting game characters ever was born. Ryu, but darker and more powerful, could have ended badly, but Akuma's always shined as the X factor of Street Fighter's roster. He's more than just an evil boss. He's a malevolent force that is somehow neither good nor evil, which is for the best, considering Capcom eventually labelled MBison as a literal pure evil. What's funny to me is how Mortal Kombat introduced the idea of the hidden boss fight with Reptile, then gradually turned it into the biggest jobber in Mortal Kombat lore. Akuma showed up, wiped out MBison with his so powerful we can't even show you super move, gave you a nigh impossible boss fight, and then Capcom made sure to keep him going as the guy who will make you poo your pants every time he shows up. And in 2nd place we have Shao Kahn from Mortal Kombat. The worst thing I can say about Shao Kahn is that while I dig the way his latter appearances lean into his painting on the side of your van metal design, he will never be as completely rad as he was in Mortal Kombat 2 and 3. Probably because loud growling doesn't hold a candle to his eerie whisper and proud laugher. Kahn is more intimidating than most bosses. The attract sequence in Mortal Kombat 2 showed the silhouette of Kahn reading Shang Tsung, the riot act followed by a more direct look at his appearance. And it was immediately cleared that this guy was absolute trouble. The first game tried to make Goro seem terrifying, but we knew that he was still second to Shang Tsung. Shao Kahn was the boss, and we knew that even if we climbed up that ladder with Kahn standing on top of a mountain. Kahn would be the end of us, and a lot of the time he was. He would beat you with a war hammer, kick you across the room, and taunt you. You'd love him for it, right? He was so perfect as a boss that Midway simply had to bring him back for the next game. Even after taking a backseat in the subsequent games, Mortal Kombat Armageddon story revitalized him by making him the winner of what was essentially Mortal Kombat Royal Rumble. It was such a tragic turn of events that Raiden had to go back in time to stop it. Even with nearly all the good guys dead, it was all deemed worth it just because Khan was killed, at least for a few years anyways. And last but not least, in first place we have M. Bison from Street Fighter. You know what guys, as a kid right, I was always confused about why this bus driver was running his own fighting tournament, but that feeling was replaced by my rage at his damn slide kick and arm hook throw combo. You have fire hand powers, you don't need to be that smooth dude. Bison isn't as deep as a character as Sagat, or as hardcore as Akuma, or as naked as Jill, but he is possibly the hammiest final boss in the history of fighting games. All the various actors who have portrayed the character seem to be taken by the infectious fun that comes with playing him. Whether that's Raul Julia in the first live action movie, or Gerald C. Rivers or Kenji Otsumi in the games, or Richard Newman on the cartoon, and hell, even Neil MacDonald had his moments in that crappy Chun-Li movie. As the final boss that anyone ever cared about, Bison is the wonderful pile of escalating craziness. Over time, he's become a comedically jacked guy with a constant smile who plots involve Buddha statues with laser faces, running over Ryu with a big ass truck, shoving his soul into agenda-swapped clones and dropping satellites onto civilization for the sake of causing chaos. Capcom can try their best to write him out of the series, but he's just too iconic to destroy for good. Alright guys, we reached the end of my video. Did you like my order? Did you agree with my order? I know some of you are probably thinking M. Bison shouldn't be first place or Shao Kahn should be first place. Well, leave your comments below, let me know what you think, and yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching guys.